My husband packed his designer bag 2 days before Christmas and told me I was banned from his family estate. He said his ex-wife was flying in and his parents wanted his daughter to have a complete holiday with her real mother. He told me to stay home and order takeout so I would not cause a scene. I simply handed him his keys and wished him a safe drive. He drove away thinking he had just put his basic corporate wife in her place. He had absolutely no idea that before the clock struck midnight, every dollar to his name would be frozen and his perfect family would be homeless. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind an arrogant man exactly who owns the crown. I am Maya. I am 33 years old, and I build empires for a living. But standing in my custom kitchen on the morning of December 23rd, you would think I was nothing more than the help. The marble island under my hands was ice cold. The tension in the room was even colder. My husband Terrence stood across from me violently, yanking the zipper on his monogrammed leather duffel bag. He did not even look at me as he packed. He was too focused on adjusting the $40,000 watch on his wrist. It was a beautiful timepiece, heavy gold, intricate dial, flawless craftsmanship. I knew exactly how flawless it was because I was the one who quietly paid for it. Terrence finally looked up. His eyes lacked any warmth. Maya, do not come to my parents' house for Christmas tomorrow. The words fell from his mouth casually, as if he were asking me to pick up dry cleaning. I paused the sponge I was using to wipe down the pristine countertop. I kept my face entirely blank. He mistook my silence for confusion and let out a harsh breath. Chloe is going to be there, he continued, dropping the name of his ex-wife without a hint of remorse. My parents want Zuri to have a complete Christmas with her real mother. You understand, right? Do not make this a thing. I looked at the man I had married. Terrence was striking a successful logistics executive who dressed in tailored suits and carried himself with the unearned confidence of a billionaire. He believed his own hype. He believed the narrative his parents DeAndre and Vivian had spoon-fed him since birth. They were a prominent family in Atlanta, proud and obsessed with their image. They had always treated me with thinly veiled disdain. To them, I was just a glorified bank teller, a basic financial worker who had gotten lucky when their handsome, brilliant son decided to settle down with someone plain. They worshipped Chloe because she came from old money, even if that money had dried up years ago. They wanted their granddaughter Zuri to have her real mother present, and Terrence was willing to cast me aside on the most important holiday of the year just to appease them. I did not scream. I did not throw the glass I was washing. I did not narrate my years of enduring his mother's backhanded compliments or his father's dismissive sneers. Instead, I showed my compliance. I carefully rinsed the sponge, wrung it out, and placed it perfectly beside the brass faucet. I dried my hands on a linen towel. I kept my expression perfectly neutral. This was the moment he expected a fight. He thrived on drama. He wanted me to cry so he could call me hysterical. He wanted me to beg so he could feel powerful. I denied him that satisfaction. Terrence watched me dry my hands. A condescending smirk crept across his face. He truly mistook my absolute silence for submission. He reached for his cashmere coat, shrugging it on with a theatrical sigh. Good. I am glad you are being mature about this. Just stay here. Enjoy the quiet. Order some takeout. Use my card if you want to treat yourself. Just do not make a scene and ruin this for Zuri. He thought he was being generous. He thought offering me permission to buy dinner with his credit card was a grand gesture. I walked over to the mahogany entryway table, picked up his car keys, and held them out to him. I did not shed a single tear. I did not utter a single plea. I looked directly into his eyes and handed him the keys. The audience of my life would see nothing but a dutiful wife sending her husband off to his family. But internally, I was executing a flawless calculation. Drive safely, Terrence, I said. My voice was smooth and perfectly leveled. He snatched the keys from my hand, adjusting his lapel. See you on the 26th, Maya. I stood in the doorway and watched him walk out to his luxury sport utility vehicle. The crisp winter air rushed into the foyer, but I did not shiver. I watched the heavy tires crunch against the gravel of our sprawling driveway. I watched him settle into the driver's seat of a vehicle that cost more than most people's homes. He revved the engine, the deep rumble echoing through the quiet, affluent neighborhood. He drove away feeling like the king of the world. He believed he was the ultimate breadwinner, the ruler of his domain, merely humoring the woman he had married out of convenience. As the sleek black vehicle disappeared down the winding road, my mind catalogued the reality he was too arrogant to see. He did not know that the vehicle he was driving was leased through a corporate entity entirely controlled by my holding company. He did not know that the sprawling estate he had just departed was purchased with funds generated from my private equity portfolio. And he certainly did not know that the initial seed money that had launched his so-called successful logistics company had been silently injected by an anonymous angel investor. That investor was me. I had built him. I had funded his entire reality. I had provided the safety net that allowed him to strut through life making demands and disrespecting the very foundation he stood upon. He thought he was leaving behind a weak, compliant woman who would spend Christmas weeping into a carton of cheap noodles. He was fundamentally mistaken. The moment his red taillights vanished completely from my line of sight, the dutiful wife facade dropped. The house was completely silent, but the air was charged with electric anticipation. I closed the heavy front door and locked the deadbolt. I walked past the massive glittering Christmas tree in the living room without giving it a second glance. I moved straight to the bar cart. I poured myself a single glass of neat bourbon, the amber liquid catching the light of the crystal decanter. I took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle in my chest, and walked down the hall to my private home office. This room was my true domain. Behind the heavy oak doors lay the nerve center of my actual life. I sat down at my desk and pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner of my locked encrypted laptop. The screen flared to life, illuminating the dark room with cascading rows of financial data, offshore accounts, and corporate structuring documents. This was not the computer of a glorified bank teller. This was the command center of a senior wealth manager who manipulated millions of dollars before breakfast. I pulled out my secure mobile phone. I scrolled past the family group chats that had been muted for months and found the private number of my lead corporate attorney, Julian. The line rang exactly twice before he answered. He knew I never called on this line unless the situation was critical. Maya, Julian said, his voice crisp and professional. "It is time," I replied. My voice was chillingly brief. The warmth of the bourbon was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. "Execute the liquidation protocol. All of it." "Understood," Julian responded immediately. "Are we initiating the asset freezes as well?" Everything I confirmed. The cars, the real estate holding companies, the corporate credit lines. Cut the funding to his business accounts, call in the debts. I want him severed from my capital entirely by midnight. Consider it done. I lowered the phone and ended the call. A sharp click echoed in the quiet room. That single sound signaled the beginning of the end for Terrence and his unearned empire. He wanted a complete Christmas with his real family. I was about to ensure he got exactly what he asked for with absolutely nothing else to his name. The satisfying click of the deadbolt echoing behind me was the only goodbye that house deserved. I walked back into the kitchen, the space that had been my designated domestic prison, just 20 minutes ago, and pulled a sleek overnight bag from the hall closet. I packed precisely what I needed for a weekend of absolute warfare. Silk loungewear, a tailored blazer, and my backup encrypted ledger drives. Before turning away, I slipped the 5-carat diamond off my left hand. I let it drop onto the cold marble of the kitchen island. The sharp clatter of the platinum band hitting the stone felt like a gavel striking a block. Sentence passed. Judgment final. I bypassed the passenger sedan Terrence expected me to drive and walked straight to the climate-controlled detached garage. The cover slid off my matte black Aston Martin, a vehicle Terrence had no idea I owned. The engine roared to life, a deep, guttural sound that resonated perfectly with the ice in my veins. I pulled out of the sprawling suburban estate and merged onto the highway, leaving the manicured lawns and the suffocating lies of the Sterling family in my rearview mirror. The drive into the heart of the city was a quiet transition. I watched the suburban facade fade away, replaced by the towering steel and glass monuments of downtown. This was my actual arena. I pulled into the private underground parking garage of a high-rise that catered strictly to the ultra-elite. I did not need to speak to a concierge or show an identification card. My fingerprint activated the private elevator, carrying me directly to the top floor. The doors slid open to reveal a sprawling $5 million penthouse. I had purchased it 3 years ago through a blind limited liability company based in Delaware. Terrence thought my trips into the city were for boring compliance seminars and late nights at the bank. He never knew I was returning to a fortress in the sky, a property fully paid for in cash, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the skyline. The penthouse was kept pristine and meticulously organized, a stark contrast to the chaotic, ego-driven mess of the life I had just walked away from. I moved straight to the designated command center situated in the expansive glass-enclosed loft. It was an intimidating setup. 4 ultra-high-definition monitors mounted on a custom curved desk hardwired to dedicated secure servers that bypass standard commercial networks. I sat down in the leather executive chair and entered my multi-factor authentication credentials. The screens flared to life simultaneously, bathing the dark room in a cold blue glow. I opened the master directory. The file name was simply labeled Sterling Trust. Taking a deep breath, I executed the administrative override command and logged directly into the family trust portal. I was not just a participant in this financial ecosystem. I was the architect, the gatekeeper, and the sole guarantor. I opened the first ledger, pulling up the financial profile of my father-in-law, DeAndre Sterling. To the outside world and to the exclusive country clubs, where my mother-in-law Vivian paraded her designer gowns, DeAndre was a titan of local industry. The reality glowing on my screen was a spectacular tragedy. 3 years ago, DeAndre had quietly faced total financial ruin. A series of disastrous, overly leveraged commercial real estate investments had brought federal creditors to his doorstep. He had been too proud to admit his failure to his family, and Vivian would have rather died than face public humiliation among her affluent social circle. I watched the cursor blink over the deed to their grand estate. They believed they had narrowly escaped bankruptcy through a miraculous corporate restructuring. They had absolutely no idea that I had utilized a proxy shell company to quietly purchase their defaulted debt. I had bought the banknotes. I had satisfied the creditors. I held the deed to the massive colonial mansion where they were currently preparing to host my husband's ex-wife for a picture-perfect Christmas. Every chandelier they polished, every grand staircase they walked down belonged entirely to me. They were not royalty, they were my tenants. I shifted my attention to the next monitor, pulling up the operational accounts for Terrence Logistics Solutions. Terrence loved to stand at networking events and boast about his self-made success, presenting himself as a visionary entrepreneur who built a thriving supply chain empire from the ground up. The spreadsheet in front of me told the humiliating truth. The company was hemorrhaging cash. His profit margins were razor-thin, eaten alive by his insistence on leasing luxury fleet vehicles and maintaining a lavish executive office suite he did not need. The only reason his business had not folded a year ago was because my private equity firm had been injecting monthly capital disguised as anonymous client retainer contracts. I was the invisible life support system keeping his fragile male ego inflated. I opened a third window, navigating to the joint accounts and the secondary credit lines. This was where the sheer audacity of the Sterling family truly revealed itself. I reviewed the transaction histories. I saw the exorbitant charges Vivian made at high-end boutiques, all routed through a corporate card I ultimately backed. I saw the wire transfers Terrence had authorized, funneling money into accounts I knew belonged to Chloe, supporting her failing cosmetics business under the guise of child support for Zuri. They were all feasting at a banquet I had secretly funded, completely oblivious to the fact that the chef was the very woman they openly disrespected and excluded. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The power I held in this room was absolute. For years I had maintained this illusion to keep the peace. I had tolerated their snide remarks about my modest background, swallowed the insults about my career, and played the role of the quiet, unremarkable wife. I did it because I believed in the sanctity of my marriage. I believed that quietly supporting Terrence would eventually earn me a place of genuine respect. Tonight, that delusion was dead. The man who had just told me I was not welcome at a holiday table had unknowingly handed me the match to burn his entire kingdom to the ground. I began initiating the block protocols. I selected the primary routing numbers tied to DeAndre and Vivian's estate maintenance accounts. I queued up the termination sequences for the logistics firm's incoming capital pipelines. I was not just closing a few credit cards. I was systematically severing the major arteries of their generational wealth facade. Every keystroke was a calculated strike against the people who thought my absence tomorrow would ensure a perfect Christmas. They had wanted to experience life without me. I was going to ensure they felt my absence in their bank accounts, their credit scores, and their sudden devastating fall from grace. The blue light from the monitors reflected in my eyes as I prepared the final execution commands, waiting for the precise moment to let the reality of their poverty crash down upon them. The sharp vibration of my personal cell phone shattered the quiet hum of the cooling fans in my server rack. I pulled my gaze away from the blinking execution commands on my fourth monitor and glanced down at the glowing screen. The caller identification displayed a name that immediately made my jaw tighten. Connor. Connor was the husband of my sister-in-law, Jada. He was a man who had perfected the art of weaponizing his proximity to a wealthy black family. A white man who wore sustainably sourced linen shirts, loved to quote civil rights leaders at dinner parties, and loudly proclaimed himself a progressive ally to anyone who would listen. He loved to lecture me about systemic inequality over holiday dinners, completely blind to the fact that his entire existence was subsidized by a black woman. Connor was a parasite draped in organic cotton. He had spent the last 4 years draining what he believed were Terrence's accounts to fund a string of embarrassing, unprofitable business ventures. Currently, his vanity project was an eco-friendly startup that promised to revolutionize biodegradable packaging. In reality, it was just a black hole for capital. I let the phone vibrate 3 times. I wanted to let it go to voicemail, but the strategic part of my brain knew that answering would give me real-time intelligence on the atmosphere at the Sterling estate. I swiped the screen and accepted the call, pressing the phone to my ear without saying a word. Maya, thank goodness you picked up. Connor's voice filtered through the speaker, carrying that signature blend of forced familiarity and underlying condescension. In the background, I could hear the unmistakable sounds of a grand holiday gathering. I heard the clinking of crystal wine glasses, the heavy bass of holiday music echoing through the grand foyer, and the loud booming laugh of my father-in-law, DeAndre. They were already celebrating. They were already toasting to a perfect family Christmas, completely unfazed by my exclusion. What do you want, Connor? I kept my voice perfectly flat, devoid of any emotional inflection. He let out a heavy, exaggerated sigh, playing the role of the sympathetic relative. Jada said, "You are sitting this one out." Too bad. The house looks amazing. Vivian really went all out with the caterers this year. It is a shame you could not make it, but I guess Terrence felt it was best for everyone. You know how these blended family dynamics get. Sitting this one out. That was the official family narrative they had crafted. I was not banned, so Chloe could play house with my husband. I was simply sitting it out because I could not handle the complex dynamics. Connor delivered the insult with casual precision, wrapping a slap in the face in a layer of faux pity. He was treating me like a fragile, discarded accessory. I did not take the bait. I did not defend myself or correct his assumptions. I simply waited, listening to the expensive caterers clattering in the background of a house I secretly owned. Anyway, Connor continued, pivoting swiftly from his fake sympathy to the actual reason he was calling. I am in a bit of a bind and I cannot get a hold of Terrence. His phone is going straight to voicemail. I think he is outside taking pictures with Chloe and Zuri by the new ice sculpture. He dropped the mention of Chloe and Terrence taking family pictures deliberately. It was a power play, a way to remind me of my absolute irrelevance in their circle. He expected me to flinch. He expected my voice to crack. Instead, my fingers danced across the illuminated keyboard of my command center. I pulled up the financial profile for Connor's eco-friendly startup. "I need you to pass a message to your husband for me," Connor instructed, slipping effortlessly into the tone of an executive speaking to an administrative assistant. "I have a vendor in Germany who needs an immediate capital injection for our new manufacturing run. Terrence and I discussed a holiday loan last week. It is just a temporary bridge of $50,000. Tell Terrence to approve my wire transfer before the bank closes. I need that authorization pushed through his logistics portal right now." I stared at the high-definition monitor in front of me. The audacity of this man was breathtaking. He was calling the wife his family had just banished from their home, casually mentioning her husband's ex-wife, and then ordering her to perform secretarial duties to secure his vanity funding. He assumed I was sitting in the suburban kitchen crying over a cold cup of coffee, desperate for any connection to the family. He assumed Terrence was the source of the wealth. My eyes scanned the digital ledger for his beloved startup. The $50,000 he was requesting was not for a manufacturing vendor in Germany. The data scrolling across my screen showed his pending transactions. He was attempting to clear an invoice for a luxury corporate retreat in Aspen and clear a massive outstanding balance on his personal platinum card. He was using the holiday loan to fund a ski trip for himself and Jada, masking it as a business expense. This was not an isolated incident. My fingers tapped the tracking pad, expanding the historical data. Over the past 24 months, Terrence had secretly funneled over $300,000 of what he thought was his company profit into Connor's failing business. Every single dollar of that money had originated from the private equity lines I had established to keep Terrence afloat. I had been silently financing Connor's ski trips, his organic linen shirts, and his condescending dinner party lectures. Connor sighed impatiently into the phone, annoyed by my silence. "Maya, are you there? Look, I know you are probably upset about tonight, but this is actual business. Real money is on the line here. Just send Terrence a text and tell him to hit approve on the wire portal. It will take him 2 seconds. Do not make me drive over to his house and interrupt his family time just to get a signature." He was threatening me. He was implying that if I did not act as his obedient messenger, he would go ruin Terrence's perfect moment with Chloe, and it would somehow be my fault. The deep-seated disrespect radiated from every syllable. To Connor, I was not a partner. I was not a professional. I was a roadblock standing between him and the money he felt entitled to. I leaned back in my leather executive chair. The blue light from the transaction histories illuminated the cold smile spreading across my face. I looked at the flashing green approval button on my screen. It was the master authorization gateway for the logistics firm's outgoing capital. It was the exact button Terrence used to play the role of the generous, wealthy brother-in-law. "The bank closes in exactly 40 minutes. Maya Connor snapped his fake progressive persona, entirely dissolved, replaced by the demanding, entitled parasite he truly was. "I need you to do your job and get him to authorize the transfer." I did not raise my voice. I did not express an ounce of anger. I let the absolute silence of my $5 million penthouse surround me as I prepared to answer him. I kept my eyes locked on the financial lifeline that I had provided, the very lifeline I was about to sever with a single keystroke. I placed the phone flat on the custom mahogany desk and tapped the speaker icon. Connor was still breathing heavily on the other end of the line, letting out sharp sighs of manufactured exasperation. He fully expected me to scramble. He envisioned me shrinking under his authoritative tone, desperately texting my husband to secure his approval. That was the dynamic he had grown comfortable with over the past 4 years. He played the visionary white founder, Terrence played the generous black benefactor, and I was relegated to the invisible compliant background. They had built an entire brotherhood on the foundation of my capital. My hands hovered over the mechanical keyboard. The tactile resistance of the keys felt incredibly grounding. I did not type out a frantic text message to the man currently parading his ex-wife around my property. Instead, my fingers executed a sequence of administrative commands I had personally programmed into the wealth management interface. "Are you messaging him or what?" Connor snapped, his voice echoing thinly from the phone speaker. Maya, I am not playing games here. If this wire bounces, my entire supply chain freezes. Jada is going to be humiliated if we have to cancel our holiday plans because you could not handle a simple administrative task. I ignored his voice and focused entirely on the high-definition monitor displaying his financial lifeline. I navigated directly to the corporate credit portfolio. There it was, the Platinum Business Card ending in 4109. The account was registered under his eco-friendly packaging startup, but the transaction history read like the diary of a trust fund playboy. Just last week, he had swiped it at a high-end jeweler in Buckhead to buy Jada a diamond tennis bracelet. He had presented it at Sunday dinner as a testament to his grueling hard work and recent business success. Vivian had clapped her hands in delight, praising him for taking such good care of her daughter. Terrence had patted him on the back, completely oblivious or simply indifferent to the fact that the diamond was essentially paid for by the yields of my private equity investments. I moved the cursor over the active status icon next to the platinum card. I did not hesitate. I clicked the drop-down menu and selected the immediate suspension protocol. A bright red prompt appeared on the screen asking for final confirmation to freeze all associated lines of credit. I pressed the Enter key. The status indicator shifted from a vibrant green to a harsh, unforgiving red. Suspended due to authorized account holder mandate. Next, I opened the master routing directory for Terrence Logistics Solutions. I needed to eradicate the underlying disease, not just treat the symptoms. I bypassed the superficial accounting layer and dug into the scheduled disbursements. Terrence had been incredibly sloppy. He had set up a recurring automated clearinghouse transfer disguised as a monthly consulting retainer. Every 1st and 15th of the month, $12,000 quietly slid from my holding company through Terrence's logistics firm directly into Connor's operating account. It was a perfectly orchestrated pipeline of unearned wealth. I highlighted the entire recurring transfer profile. I did not just pause it, I executed a permanent deletion protocol. I scrubbed his routing numbers, his business tax identification, and his vendor profile from the system entirely. I watched the data dissolve from the screen, wiping away 4 years of unchecked financial parasitism in less than 30 seconds. Maya! Connor barked, his voice rising in pitch, completely unaware that his digital pockets were currently being emptied. The bank representative is literally on the other line waiting for the authorization code. I need you to do your job. Stop being petty about Christmas and get Terrence to approve the funds. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cool surface of the desk. The blue light from the monitors washed over my face. I finally broke my silence. My voice was dangerously calm, devoid of any anger or the petty emotion he expected. Terrence cannot approve anything, Connor. The line went dead quiet for a fraction of a second. The sudden icy composure in my tone caught him completely off guard. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his bravado slipping just a fraction. "Just text him the portal link. He knows the login." I kept my eyes locked on the red suspended status flashing on my screen. Terrence does not have a login anymore. He does not have a portal, and he certainly does not have $50,000 to fund your luxury ski trip to Aspen. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the call. I knew the exact moment panic pierced through his thick layer of entitlement. He had assumed his financial maneuvering was completely hidden within the complex corporate accounting. He had vastly underestimated the woman who built the architecture of those accounts. "I do not know what you are talking about," Connor stammered, his voice suddenly lacking any of its previous authority. "This is for a manufacturing vendor in Germany. It is a critical supply chain issue." I pulled up the exact invoice he had submitted to the portal earlier that afternoon. I read the details back to him with surgical precision. "It is fascinating how your German manufacturing vendor charges exactly $48,000 for a private chalet rental and a chartered flight out of Atlanta. I suppose sustainability is an expensive industry to fake." "Maya, listen to me." He started, his tone morphing instantly from demanding to desperate. "You are misunderstanding the ledger. Terrence and I have an arrangement. We have a system. You cannot just interfere with our business operations because you are having marital problems today. You do not understand how these accounts work. I let out a soft, humorless laugh that echoed in the quiet expanse of my penthouse. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance required to tell a senior wealth manager that she did not understand the accounts she personally capitalized was astounding. I understand perfectly, Connor. I am the one who built the system. I am the one who funded the logistics company Terrence uses to play venture capitalist. I am the sole guarantor of the credit line you just used to buy Jada a diamond bracelet. Or at least I was. I watched the final synchronization bar complete its cycle on my right monitor. The financial firewall was locked. The severing was absolute. "What do you mean you were?" Connor asked, the panic now fully consuming his voice. "Maya, wait. Let us just talk about this reasonably. Do not do anything crazy. If that wire does not go through, my business account goes into default by tomorrow morning. I have payroll, I have creditors. Terrence is not approving anything anymore." Connor. I leaned closer to the microphone, delivering the final devastating truth with absolute clarity. "Your funding is gone. Happy holidays." I reached out and pressed the red button on my screen, disconnecting the call. The silence that followed was immaculate. It was the sound of a parasitic cord being cut. Less than 5 seconds later, my cell phone illuminated again. The screen flashed frantically. Connor calling. I let it ring. I watched the screen go dark, only for it to light up immediately with a second incoming call, then a third. Then a barrage of text messages began flooding in, shifting rapidly from demanding threats to pathetic, frantic apologies. He was begging for a conversation, begging for a grace period, begging for the very woman he had just insulted to save him from financial ruin. I did not read a single message. I picked up the phone, navigated to his contact profile, and tapped the block button. I placed the phone back down on the desk. The screen went dark, shutting out his panic completely. I turned my attention to the next monitor, ready to execute the next phase of the liquidation. I had just dismantled the brother-in-law. The rest of the family was about to follow. I pushed Connor out of my mind and shifted my chair toward the center console of my workstation. Outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, the downtown skyline was settling into the quiet hum of Christmas Eve. Snow was beginning to fall, dusting the skyscrapers in a pristine layer of white. It was peaceful up here in the stratosphere. Inside my penthouse, however, my monitors were a vibrant, pulsing battleground. I opened a dedicated secure browser window and pulled up the social media profiles of the Sterling family. I had muted their accounts months ago to preserve my peace, refusing to subject myself to their endless digital bragging. But tonight, their feeds were my primary intelligence source. The Sterlings were chronic oversharers, absolutely addicted to projecting an image of generational wealth, untouchable class, and flawless family harmony. They lived for the validation of the Atlanta elite. Tonight, that desperate need for digital applause would be their exact downfall. At exactly 8 o'clock, the first major post went live. It was from Vivian. I clicked on the high-resolution image, expanding it across my secondary monitor. There was the massive 12-foot imported fir tree I had quietly paid the decorators to install in the grand foyer just 2 weeks ago. Standing in front of it was Terrence, wearing a tailored velvet blazer and flashing his signature charismatic smile. To his right stood Zuri, looking adorable in a custom holiday dress. And standing directly to his left, her hand resting intimately on his shoulder, was Chloe. Chloe was dressed in a sweeping silk gown, her hair perfectly styled, looking every bit the society wife she so desperately wanted to remain. They looked like a magazine cover. They looked perfectly cohesive. I read the caption Vivian had typed below the photo. "Nothing like having the real family together for the holidays. Blood is thicker than water, and true class never fades. So blessed to have the house full of the people who truly belong here." A year ago, reading those words would have sent me into a devastating spiral of self-doubt. I would have sat in the dark wondering what I lacked. I would have asked myself why my Ivy League degrees, my relentless work ethic, my financial support, and my unwavering loyalty were never enough to earn a single ounce of genuine respect at their table. I would have cried in the master bathroom, so Terrence would not see my weakness, allowing him to maintain his illusion of control. Not tonight. Tonight, I looked at the photograph and felt absolutely nothing but the icy, mechanical precision of a surgeon holding a scalpel. They did not just want to exclude me from a holiday dinner. They wanted to erase my existence entirely. They wanted to replace me with a woman whose primary achievement was being born to a family that used to have money in the 1980s. A woman who played the role of the submissive, decorative ex-wife to perfection. I zoomed in on the photograph. I looked at the diamond earrings sparkling on Vivian's ears. I looked at the imported Italian marble flooring beneath their feet. Vivian wanted to talk to her thousands of followers about who truly belonged in that house. I decided it was time to legally clarify the property rights. I did not react with tears. I reacted with keystrokes. I minimized the social media feed and brought up the master deed directory on my primary monitor. Vivian loved to host. She loved to invite prominent politicians and business leaders to her home, serving catered meals and pouring wildly expensive wine, basking in the illusion that she was the matriarch of an untouchable financial dynasty. She actively mocked women who had to work for a living, constantly throwing subtle jabs at my career. She treated me like a charity case Terrence had picked up from the wrong side of the tracks, willfully ignoring the fact that her own husband had driven their finances straight into a brick wall. When DeAndre faced federal tax liens and total bankruptcy 3 years ago, he was terrified of Vivian finding out. He came to Terrence, and Terrence came to me, begging for a solution that would not destroy his family name. I had used my private equity firm to bail them out, securing their debts through a proxy corporation. I highlighted the deed to the Sterling estate on my screen. The property was held under a trust managed by my proxy. I opened the legal communication portal, connecting me directly to the retained law firm that handled my real estate enforcement. I did not draft a long emotional email complaining about my mother-in-law. I kept it strictly business. I attached the digital deed, the default records from 3 years ago, and the current ownership structure documents. I typed a single, irreversible directive to my property attorneys. Initiate eviction protocols for the Buckhead estate immediately. Draft the 30-day notice to vacate. Prepare the physical documents for immediate delivery tomorrow morning. I hit send. The automated response flashed on the screen confirming receipt and processing by the legal team. I took a slow sip of my bourbon, feeling the smooth burn in the back of my throat. Vivian's real family was about to spend their upcoming holidays packing their belongings into cardboard boxes. They were going to learn very quickly that true class might never fade, but home ownership certainly does when you do not pay your own mortgage. But I was far from finished. A single post from the matriarch was just the opening salvo. As I refreshed the browser, a new notification popped up. Terrence had just uploaded a video to his own feed and Chloe was tagging him in her stories. They were feeding me the exact targets I needed, handing me the coordinates for their own destruction, one smug post at a time. I cracked my knuckles, shifted my gaze to the next monitor, and prepared to dismantle the next pillar of their fake reality. My finger tapped the refresh key on the social media dashboard. The algorithm, completely oblivious to the financial slaughter taking place inside my penthouse, eagerly served up a fresh upload on Terrence's profile. It was a high-definition video posted just 2 minutes ago. I leaned closer to the monitor, the cool leather of my chair creaking slightly in the silent room. Terrence was standing on the sweeping circular driveway of the estate. The exterior lighting caught the sharp angles of his fresh haircut and the rich texture of his velvet dinner jacket. He held a crystal tumbler of dark liquor in one hand, while using the other to pan his phone camera across the property. He was grinning with that specific, arrogant swagger of a man who believed he had conquered Atlanta. The camera swept past the manicured hedges and locked onto the centerpiece of the driveway. There it sat, gleaming under the security lights. A custom matte, black Mercedes G-Wagon. "Hard work pays off," Terrence announced to his thousands of followers, his voice dripping with unearned pride. "When you grind all year, you get to provide the best for your people, giving my girls the luxury they deserve. Merry Christmas to the real ones making it happen." The camera briefly flipped to show Chloe stepping into the frame. She leaned against the heavy passenger door of the vehicle, laughing flawlessly, for the camera adjusting a designer scarf around her neck. Zuri was visible in the background, playing near the massive front columns of the house. It was the ultimate display of patriarchal success. He was the provider. He was the king displaying his spoils. I set my glass of bourbon down on the desk. The ice clinked sharply against the crystal. That vehicle was not a testament to his hard work. It was a monument to my tolerance. 11 months ago, Terrence had come to me complaining that his logistics company needed a flagship executive vehicle to project the right image to potential clients. He tried to finance it through his business, but his corporate credit score was a complete disaster. The dealership had practically laughed him off the lot. He had returned home humiliated, begging me to leverage my banking contacts to secure a lease. I did not just secure a lease. I used a subsidiary holding company under my private equity umbrella to purchase the vehicle outright in cash. I then drafted a severely underpriced corporate lease agreement between my holding company and his logistics firm. I allowed him to drive a $200,000 piece of machinery for the cost of a mid-range sedan simply to protect his fragile ego and keep the peace in my household. He drove that vehicle to exclusive golf clubs, tossed the keys to valets at five-star restaurants, and allowed his parents to boast about their son's incredible vehicular upgrades. He was using my asset to play the role of the generous provider for the woman he had replaced me with for the holidays. I opened a new terminal on my second monitor and bypassed the standard banking portals, logging directly into the fleet management database of my holding company. The interface was strictly utilitarian black text on a harsh white background. I entered the vehicle identification number from memory. The master profile populated instantly. Status active. Lessee Terrence Logistics Solutions. Location currently pinging via satellite GPS directly in the driveway of the Buckhead estate. My fingers hovered over the mechanical keyboard for only a fraction of a second. I navigated to the Contract Enforcement tab. The terms of the lease I had structured were incredibly strict, a standard protective measure I utilized for all corporate assets. A single missed payment, or a breach of the Morality and Conduct Clause, granted the holding company the right to immediate, unannounced repossession. Terrence had failed to make the nominal lease payment for the last 2 months, assuming I would simply cover the shortage from our joint accounts as I always did. He assumed the grace period of a wife extended to the ruthless mechanics of corporate finance. I clicked the primary execution button. Status revoked. Contract terminated. The digital tether was instantly severed. But clicking a button on a screen was not enough. I wanted the physical manifestation of his failure removed from that driveway while his family was still pouring their second round of holiday cocktails. I picked up my secure mobile phone and dialed a specialized asset recovery firm I kept on retainer for commercial defaults. They were not a standard suburban towing company. They were a tactical repossession agency operating out of downtown Atlanta, staffed by men who specialized in extracting high-value assets from hostile, wealthy environments. The dispatcher answered on the first ring. Midnight recovery. I need a priority extraction. I stated, my voice completely stripped of emotion. The dispatcher let out a rough sigh. Ma'am, it is Christmas Eve. My drivers are running on skeleton crews tonight. Unless it is a commercial rig blocking a highway, it is going to have to wait until the 26th. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the mahogany desk. I will pay a $10,000 premium for an immediate dispatch. The funds will wire to your commercial account the second the truck leaves your lot. I need an asset removed from a residential driveway in Buckhead within the hour. The heavy silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 3 seconds. I knew the exact moment the monetary value overrode his holiday schedule. Give me the address and the vehicle details. The dispatcher said, the fatigue entirely gone from his voice. I recited the address of the estate, the make, model, and license plate of the vehicle. It is behind a gated community, the dispatcher noted, typing rapidly in the background. My guys cannot breach a security gate without a police escort, and we are not getting a civil standby on a holiday night. You will not need to breach anything, I replied smoothly. I own the property. I read off the master administrative code for the neighborhood security gate. I then provided the secondary override code for the estate's private wrought iron driveway gates. I opened the live GPS tracking window on my monitor. The vehicle is facing outward, parked unobstructed in the center of the primary turnaround. The keys are likely inside the residence, but my holding company retains remote administrative access. I will electronically unlock the transmission and disengage the parking brake from my terminal the moment your driver secures the tow cables. He will not even need to approach the front door. He can hook it up, lift it, and drag it right off the property before they finish their eggnog. Consider it done, the dispatcher confirmed. I am sending my best guy, he is 5 miles out. I ended the call and placed the phone face down. On my screen, the pulsing blue dot of the GPS tracker remained perfectly still in the driveway. In less than 20 minutes, that dot would start moving down the highway, dragging Terrence's pride and joy straight to an impound lot. He would walk outside tomorrow morning to pack his ex-wife's luggage into his prized possession, only to find empty pavement and the undeniable reality that he owned absolutely nothing. 2 targets acquired and neutralized. The brother-in-law was financially suffocated. The luxury vehicle was minutes away from being violently repossessed. I stretched my neck, feeling the satisfying crack of tension releasing. I turned my eyes to the third monitor. It was time to deal with Chloe. My third monitor illuminated with a fresh notification. Chloe had just gone live on her social media feed. The timing was almost too perfect, as if she were reading a script I had written for my own amusement. I expanded the video window, letting her face fill the high-resolution screen. She was standing in the grand foyer of the estate, positioned perfectly so the sweeping mahogany staircase and the imported crystal chandelier framed her in the background. She wore a crimson silk gown that dragged elegantly across the floor, holding a flute of vintage champagne. It was the exact vintage champagne I had specially ordered from a private vineyard in France last month, now being sipped by the woman parading around in my property. Chloe smiled brightly into the camera, tossing her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. She began talking rapidly to her thousands of followers, her voice dripping with that specific brand of manufactured enthusiasm reserved for internet audiences. She was boasting about Glow by Chloe, her high-end cosmetics boutique situated in one of the most expensive retail districts in Midtown Atlanta. She held up her champagne glass, announcing that her store had just experienced a record-breaking week of holiday sales. She claimed she was completely sold out of her signature inventory and thanked her loyal customers for supporting a self-made independent business owner. Then she turned the camera slightly to her right. Terrence stepped into the frame, sliding his arm around her waist. Chloe leaned her head against his shoulder and looked back at the lens. And a massive shout-out to my amazing co-parent and sponsor, she purrs, raising her glass to him. Real men invest in the mothers of their children. Thank you for always making sure my vision comes to life. Terrence offered the camera a humble, incredibly fake nod, playing the role of the benevolent millionaire provider. Sponsor. That single word echoed in the immaculate silence of my penthouse. A sponsor implies a benefactor operating from a surplus of his own wealth. Terrence was not a sponsor. Terrence was a thief. I leaned back in my leather chair, observing the digital performance with clinical detachment. Glow by Chloe was a spectacular financial disaster. I knew this not through rumors, but through hard, undeniable mathematics. From the day the ribbon was cut on that storefront 2 years ago, the boutique had been bleeding cash. Chloe possessed zero actual business acumen. She had drained her initial capital on lavish launch parties, imported floral walls for aesthetic photo opportunities, and exorbitant influencer marketing campaigns, while completely ignoring fundamental principles like inventory management, overhead cost control, and payroll taxes. She loved the title of Chief Executive Officer, but she despised the actual labor required to sustain a business. I had discovered the massive discrepancy 6 months ago during a routine late-night audit of our joint commercial holding accounts. I noticed a pattern of unusual capital flight. Terrence had been quietly drafting fraudulent corporate invoices. He categorized these outflows as supply chain consulting fees and warehouse maintenance costs for his logistics firm. But when I traced the routing numbers, they did not match any of our verified corporate vendors. Every single fraudulent invoice routed directly into the primary operating checking account for Glow by Chloe. Over the course of 18 months, Terrence had siphoned over $250,000 of my money to artificially inflate her sales numbers and keep her commercial landlord from initiating eviction proceedings. He did it so she would look at him with that exact expression of sparkling admiration she was currently displaying on the live video. He felt inadequate standing next to a wife who actually built empires, so he stole my labor to buy the respect of an ex-wife who did not know how to read a balance sheet. He was committing corporate embezzlement and tax fraud simply to maintain his fragile masculine ego. I did not spend the last 6 months confronting him or crying over his financial infidelity. I spent it compiling a masterpiece. I closed the social media application. I opened a new highly encrypted browser window. I bypassed standard search engines and navigated directly to the digital submission portal for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. I pulled up the encrypted master file from my secure server drive. It was a 120-page forensic accounting report, assembled with the ruthless precision of a senior wealth manager. It contained copies of every single fraudulent invoice Terrence had fabricated. It contained the exact timestamps, transaction identification numbers, and routing codes of the wire transfers originating from our joint corporate accounts and landing directly in Chloe's business checking. The document detailed the precise amount of undeclared corporate income she had received, the willful evasion of gift taxes, the commingling of personal and business funds, and the systemic corporate embezzlement orchestrated by my husband. I attached the massive digital file to the federal submission portal. I filled out the whistleblower declaration forms with absolute meticulous accuracy. I did not submit this packet anonymously. I submitted it under my own legal name, utilizing my credentials and license numbers as a registered financial fiduciary. The Internal Revenue Service receives thousands of anonymous petty complaints from angry ex-spouses every day. They often ignore them. But they absolutely do not ignore a fully documented evidence-backed forensic report submitted by a licensed senior wealth manager. They act on those. They act on them quickly, and they act on them ruthlessly. I reviewed the submission details one final time. Chloe wanted the world to know she was a fiercely independent business owner backed by a generous sponsor. I was simply ensuring her financial records accurately reflected her public statements. I pressed the submit button. A bright green confirmation code materialized on the screen, verifying that the federal government had received the payload. The wheels of federal tax investigations are famously slow, but automated fraud flags placed on commercial bank accounts are instantaneous. By the time the banking networks reopened their mainframes after the holiday weekend, the automated systems would register the federal inquiry. They would place an immediate, hard freeze on the merchant and operating accounts for Glow by Chloe pending a full audit. She would not be able to process a single customer credit card. She would not be able to pay her commercial rent. She would not be able to make her January payroll. Her suppliers would cut her off the moment her automatic payments bounced. Her boutique, her source of pride, her entire identity as a successful self-made entrepreneur would evaporate overnight. The glass doors of her perfectly decorated shop would be locked tight, a federal notice taped to the inside of the window. She wanted a sponsor to fund her luxurious lifestyle. She had just been sponsored for a comprehensive federal tax audit. I closed the browser, the green confirmation code vanishing into the dark screen. The silence in the penthouse felt heavier now, charged with the undeniable weight of irreversible actions. My husband's primary source of ego, his luxury vehicle, was currently sitting on the back of a tow truck. His ex-wife's business was now fundamentally destroyed by a federal trigger. I took another sip of my bourbon, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. 2 pillars of his perfect holiday had been systematically obliterated. It was time to pull the final lever on the entire estate. I shifted my attention back to the primary monitor and refreshed the social media dashboard one final time. I knew Vivian could not resist the urge to showcase her holiday table before her guests sat down to eat. I was right. A new video notification popped up on Vivian's profile. I maximized the window, letting her perfectly manicured face fill the screen. Vivian was wearing an emerald green silk dress draped in pearls that had been passed down from her grandmother. She was holding her phone high, walking slowly through the massive formal dining room of the Buckhead estate. The long mahogany table was set for 12. Crystal wine glasses caught the light from the roaring fireplace. Sterling silver flatware gleamed against crisp white linen napkins. It looked like a scene from a holiday movie about the ultra-wealthy. "Welcome to the Sterling family Christmas!" Vivian purred to her audience, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "We believe in keeping our traditions alive. In a world where so many people forget their roots, we pride ourselves on maintaining our generational wealth and protecting our legacy. It is so important to surround yourself with people who share your pedigree, people who truly understand what it means to build and sustain a dynasty." She panned the camera to show DeAndre standing by the fireplace pouring a glass of scotch. He raised his glass to the camera, looking every bit the triumphant patriarch. Vivian turned the camera back to herself, offering a knowing, condescending smile. "Not everyone can handle the weight of this legacy." She continued, slipping the insult in with the smooth precision of a seasoned socialite. "Some people just do not have the breeding for it. But tonight we have our real family here, the people who matter. Merry Christmas to everyone protecting their bloodlines." I reached over and muted the audio. I did not need to hear another word. The sheer, unadulterated delusion radiating from that video was a masterpiece of cognitive dissonance. Vivian was standing in a dining room she did not own, boasting about generational wealth her husband had entirely squandered, while throwing passive-aggressive insults at the very woman who was currently putting a roof over her head. 3 years ago, DeAndre Sterling had played the market and lost spectacularly. He had leveraged his commercial real estate holdings to fund a series of disastrous private investments. When the market corrected, the banks came calling. DeAndre was facing total financial ruin, a federal bankruptcy filing, and the immediate foreclosure of the beloved Buckhead estate. Vivian would have been a laughingstock in her exclusive social circles. The shame would have destroyed them. Terrence had come to me in the middle of the night, terrified and begging for a solution. He pleaded with me to use my private equity contacts to stall the banks. I did more than stall them. I utilized a blind trust and a proxy corporation to quietly purchase their defaulted debt outright. I paid off the aggressive creditors and assumed the note on the estate. DeAndre and Vivian were told that a private investment firm had acquired their mortgage and restructured their debt into a manageable forbearance program. They believed their legacy was saved. They believed they had outsmarted the system. They never bothered to read the fine print of the restructuring agreement, and they certainly never suspected that the anonymous investment firm was wholly owned and operated by their daughter-in-law. For the past 3 years, they had been living in my house. I was their landlord. And for the past 6 months, DeAndre had conveniently stopped making the nominal forbearance payments, assuming the faceless corporation would not bother to foreclose on a prominent Atlanta family. He was about to learn a brutal lesson in commercial real estate law. I opened the master property management portal on my screen. I pulled up the heavily encrypted file containing the original promissory note, the deed of trust, and the restructuring agreement signed by DeAndre. I highlighted the default clause. The terms I had drafted were ironclad. A single missed payment during the forbearance period gave the note holder the absolute right to accelerate the debt, calling the entire principal balance due immediately. I picked up my secure phone and dialed the private number for my lead real estate attorney. He answered on the second ring, fully aware that I only called this late on a holiday for execution orders. "We are pulling the lever on the Buckhead property," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "The forbearance period is officially terminated due to non-payment. Call the note due in full." "I understand," he replied smoothly. "They are currently 6 months in arrears. Do you want to initiate the standard warning protocols or proceed directly to acceleration?" "Proceed directly to acceleration," I instructed. "Generate the formal notice of default and the 30-day notice to vacate. I do not want this sent through the mail. I want the physical documents hand-delivered by a private process server. I want the server standing on their front porch at exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." "It will be drafted and dispatched immediately," he confirmed. "Merry Christmas, Maya." I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the cool mahogany desk. I turned my attention back to the massive digital clock displayed across the top of my primary monitor. It was 11:55 in the evening. I had spent the last 3 hours systematically dismantling the financial architecture of the entire Sterling family. I reviewed my work. Connor's corporate credit lines were dead, his supply chain funding permanently severed. The black Mercedes SUV that served as Terrence's primary source of ego was currently strapped to the back of a tow truck heading toward an impound lot. Chloe's boutique was flagged in the federal database for an impending criminal tax audit, ensuring her business checking accounts would be frozen by Monday morning. And now, the generational estate Vivian was currently broadcasting to the world was officially in active foreclosure. They had excluded me from their holiday table because I did not fit their pedigree. They wanted to enjoy a peaceful, luxurious Christmas, wrapped in the illusion of their own superiority. I had simply decided to remove the financial subsidies that made their illusion possible. The digital clock ticked forward. 11:56, 11:57. I leaned back in my executive chair, steepling my fingers together. Outside my window, the city of Atlanta was quiet, blanketed in a rare, peaceful snowfall. Inside my penthouse, the automated banking systems were silently preparing to execute their batch processing for the midnight hour. 11:58. I thought about Terrence sitting by the fire, holding a glass of my expensive wine, looking at Chloe, and believing he had successfully put me in my place. He thought I was a weak, compliant woman crying in the suburbs. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet had already turned to ash. 11:59. The numbers on the screen shifted, the hour changed. Midnight struck. Night. A cascade of green confirmation lights flashed across my four monitors simultaneously. The synchronization was complete. The automated financial freezes hit the banking networks with devastating precision. The credit blocks were locked. The transfer cancellations were permanent. The eviction protocols were filed. The entire Sterling family was now officially locked out of their fake reality. I took a deep breath, savoring the absolute silence of the penthouse, and waited for my phone to ring. The digital clock in the upper right corner of my primary monitor shifted from 11:59 to exactly midnight. There was no audible chime in my penthouse, no dramatic strike of a grandfather clock. The execution was entirely silent, yet the impact was more devastating than a physical explosion. I watched with absolute unblinking focus as the automated financial freezes hit the global banking networks. The synchronization I had programmed executed with flawless robotic precision. A cascade of red notification banners flooded my screens. The color washed over my face, reflecting in the dark glass of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snow-covered Atlanta skyline. The first system to lock down was the Sterling Family Trust. This was the holy grail of Vivian and DeAndre, the mythical well of generational wealth they used to bludgeon anyone they deemed beneath them. I watched the status indicator shift from active to suspended. The routing numbers were deactivated. The linked debit cards were instantly invalidated. I remembered the Thanksgiving dinner where Vivian told her country club friends that I was lucky to marry into a family with such a robust financial legacy. She had patted my hand condescendingly, telling me I would never have to worry about my little bank teller's salary again. She did not know that her legacy was a rotting carcass, and I was the only one preventing the vultures from picking the bones clean. Now the vault was sealed and the keys were destroyed. The second wave hit Terrence Logistics Solutions. His business checking accounts, his payroll reserves, and his corporate credit lines flatlined simultaneously. The available balances plummeted to zero. The system placed hard holds on all outgoing wires and froze the incoming merchant processing. Terrence loved to host lavish corporate retreats and expense them to the company, boasting about his massive overhead. He thought his masculine charm and aggressive networking kept his business afloat. He never realized his entire corporate structure was a house of cards resting on the solid foundation of my private equity injections. That foundation was just violently yanked away. Finally, the localized freezes hit his personal accounts. His checking, his savings, and the exclusive black metal credit card he loved to toss onto restaurant tables. Locked, suspended, flagged for administrative review. I pushed my chair back from the workstation. The leather squeaked softly in the massive, quiet expanse of my $5 million sanctuary. I walked over to the custom bar cart positioned near the window. I picked up the heavy crystal decanter and poured a fresh measure of bourbon. The amber liquid swirled smoothly in the glass. I took a slow sip, feeling the familiar burn slide down my throat, grounding me in the reality of what I had just accomplished. I walked back to my desk and remained standing, leaning over the console to open a secondary tracking dashboard. I had coded a specific alert protocol into the freeze mandate. Any attempted transaction on the locked accounts would bounce a denial notification directly to my server. I wanted to witness the exact moments the panic began to set in. I did not have to wait long. At 12:12 in the morning, the first alert pinged on my screen. It was a transaction attempt on Terrence's personal black card for $8,000 at an exclusive online luxury retailer. He was trying to authorize a rush delivery jewelry purchase. He was attempting to buy Chloe a spectacular Christmas morning surprise, likely a diamond necklace to match the earrings she wore in her smug social media video. He wanted to play the role of the generous, wealthy co-parent showering his real family with expensive gifts. The system rejected it instantly. Insufficient funds, account frozen. I smiled, taking another sip of my bourbon. I remembered the cubic zirconia engagement ring he had given me, claiming it was a priceless family heirloom, because he allegedly did not want commercial diamonds tainting our authentic love. He saved the real diamonds for the woman who demanded them, funding the purchases with the very money I earned. Not anymore. Chloe would be waking up to an empty stocking. 2 minutes later, a barrage of alerts lit up the screen from the family trust account. Vivian was attempting to process a massive payment to the elite catering company she had hired for their holiday feast. The caterers likely required final settlement before leaving the premises. The primary card declined. Vivian tried a secondary card linked to the trust. Declined. She tried a third. Declined. I could perfectly visualize the scene unfolding in the grand foyer of the estate I legally owned. Vivian wearing her emerald silk dress and heirloom pearls, laughing nervously as she handed the catering manager card after card, her perfectly manicured facade cracking as each terminal beeped in rejection. The embarrassment would be suffocating. The caterers would demand payment. DeAndre would try to step in with his own cards only to find them equally useless. The facade of their untouchable upper-class dynasty was fracturing in real time in front of hired staff. Another alert flashed. Connor was desperately trying to log into his commercial supply chain portal to force a manual override on the wire transfer I had canceled earlier. The system denied his login credentials entirely. Account does not exist. He was officially locked out of the bank vault he had been raiding for 4 years. The tension in my penthouse built to an intoxicating peak. The silence of my command center was a stark, beautiful contrast to the absolute chaos I knew was erupting miles away in Buckhead. I did not feel an ounce of guilt. I did not feel a trace of the sadness they expected from the discarded basic wife. I felt the pure, unadulterated clarity of a woman who had finally stopped setting herself on fire to keep a family of parasites warm. Terrence had spent the last 3 years making me feel like an outsider in my own marriage. He flaunted Chloe. He allowed his parents to disrespect me to my face. He assumed my silence was submission and my patience was weakness. He fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the woman he married. True predators do not roar before they strike. They study the ecosystem. They identify the weaknesses. They wait for the perfect, most devastating moment to snap the trap shut. Midnight was my moment. The financial networks were cold automated and entirely devoid of holiday spirit. A frozen account does not care that it is Christmas Eve. The banking infrastructure only obeys code, and I held the absolute master key. I sat back down in my executive chair, placing my bourbon on a leather coaster. The digital bloodbath was complete. The arteries were severed. The empire was burned to the ground. Now it was only a matter of time before the reality of their destruction sank in. I rested my hands on the desk, keeping my eyes locked on the dark screen of my secure mobile phone. The trap was sprung. I simply sat in the beautiful, expensive silence of my hidden fortress, waiting for the phone to ring. Exactly at 12:15 in the morning, the heavy silence of my penthouse was finally broken. The secure mobile phone resting on my mahogany desk lit up its harsh vibration, buzzing sharply against the wood. I looked down at the glowing screen. Terrence calling. I did not lunge for the device. I sat back in my leather executive chair, steepled my fingers together, and simply watched the screen flash in the dark. I let it ring once. That first ring was for the way he had zipped up his monogrammed duffel bag in my pristine kitchen just hours ago, casually adjusting the $40,000 watch I had quietly paid for, completely dismissing my presence in my own home. For years, I had jumped at the first ring. I had conditioned myself to be the hyper-responsive, problem-solving wife, terrified of bruising his fragile ego. If Terrence called, Maya answered. If Terrence needed capital to save a failing logistics deal, Maya wired it before he even had to ask twice. That version of me was officially dead and buried. The phone continued to vibrate across the desk. I let it ring a second time. That second ring was for the sheer, unadulterated disrespect of telling a black woman who built a private equity empire from the ground up that she was not welcome at a holiday table because she lacked the proper pedigree. It was for his mother Vivian and his father DeAndre, who were undoubtedly currently hyperventilating in their grand foyer, realizing their generational wealth was nothing but a ghost story I had been funding. I could picture the exact shade of panic setting into Terrence's face right now. He was the man who always had to be the smartest, most powerful person in the room. Now the walls of his carefully constructed reality were collapsing, and he was frantically grasping for the woman he had just thrown away like garbage. The third ring echoed in the quiet room. I took a slow, deliberate breath, centering myself. I was not operating out of petty vindictiveness or emotional instability. This was a hostile corporate takeover of my personal life. I picked up the phone. I did not swipe to answer immediately. I waited until the very last second before the call would roll to voicemail. I pressed the green accept button and brought the cold device to my ear. I did not say hello. I did not ask what was wrong. I simply sat in the beautiful, expensive silence of my penthouse and listened to the destruction I had caused. The audio that flooded through the speaker was absolute, unfiltered chaos. The polished, aristocratic atmosphere of the Sterling family Christmas had completely evaporated. I could hear Vivian in the background, her voice pitched to an undignified shrill shriek, aggressively arguing with someone who sounded remarkably like the head caterer. I heard the distinct frantic pacing of heavy footsteps on hardwood floors. I heard Connor, the supposed progressive ally, shouting profanities about a German wire transfer and threatening to sue a bank manager for gross negligence. Maya! Terrence's voice barked through the phone. It was loud, demanding, and laced with a tight, breathless panic he was desperately trying to conceal under his usual authoritative tone. Maya, are you there? Pick up the phone and talk to me right now. I took a slow sip of my bourbon. The ice shifted softly against the crystal glass, a sound that translated clearly over the phone line. I let him stew in the silence for another 5 seconds, establishing total control of the pacing. I am here, Terrence, I replied. My voice was smooth, perfectly level, and entirely devoid of the hysterical emotion he was expecting. I told you I would be having a quiet night. Do not play games with me right now, Maya. He snapped, his breathing ragged. Something is catastrophically wrong with the accounts. All of them. I am standing here in the foyer with the catering manager, and every single card linked to the family trust is declining. My corporate cards are completely locked. I just tried to log into the logistics portal to check the reserve balances, and the entire system is rejecting my administrative credentials. I glanced up at my secondary monitor. I watched the live security log confirm exactly what he was saying. Multiple failed login attempts originating from his mobile device. I had revoked his access privileges 45 minutes ago. You need to call Julian and the bank liaison immediately and figure out what kind of glitch this is. Terrence demanded, the panic bleeding through his aggressive facade. Connor is in the living room losing his mind over a wire transfer that just bounced back, and Chloe is complaining that her boutique merchant account sent her an automated federal suspension notice. Get on your laptop and fix this. I listened to him unravel. He was still giving orders. Even while standing in the burning wreckage of his financial life, his immediate instinct was to command the glorified bank teller to fix the administrative error. He truly believed this was a massive coincidental server failure. His towering arrogance shielded him from the terrifying truth that a woman could outsmart him so comprehensively. He thought a banking glitch had ruined his perfect Christmas with his ex-wife, not a targeted strike by his current one. "Fix it, Maya," he demanded again, his voice cracking slightly. "Wake Julian up if you have to. This is completely unacceptable. We have prominent guests arriving tomorrow morning. The caterers are threatening to pack up the food and leave. I cannot have my parents humiliated like this in front of their social circle. Get the fraud department on the line and authorize an emergency override." He wanted me to save his parents from humiliation. He wanted me to protect the very people who had actively campaigned for my exclusion, using the very capital they openly despised. He wanted me to ensure Chloe had a wonderful holiday meal in the house I owned. I leaned closer to the microphone on my phone. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I let the absolute terrifying calmness of my tone do the work. I prepared to deliver the exact words that would permanently shatter his world. "Maya, answer me right now." His voice cracked. It was a sharp, pathetic sound that completely shattered the polished baritone executive persona he practiced in the mirror every morning. The smug, arrogant tone from the kitchen was completely gone. In its place was raw, unadulterated terror. He was breathing heavily, his gasps echoing through the speaker as if he had just sprinted up a flight of stairs. "Maya! What did you do?" Terrence shouted. His voice was frantic, trembling with a mix of rage and absolute panic. "My cards are declining. The company accounts are frozen. Connor is in the living room screaming that his startup just went under. Why did you do this to me?" I did not utter a single syllable. I sat perfectly still, in the glow of my monitors, letting the absolute silence of my penthouse act as a mirror to his hysteria. I took a slow sip of my bourbon. The ice chimed softly against the crystal glass, a crisp, sharp note that transmitted clearly across the cellular connection. "Are you drinking?" Terrence demanded, his voice pitching higher. "I am standing in the middle of a disaster and you are drinking. You need to log into the private equity portal immediately. Something catastrophic has happened to the routing numbers. The bank is showing zero balances across the board. Every single corporate line is locked." I listened to the symphony of destruction playing out in the background of his call. The audio was a masterpiece of aristocratic collapse. I could hear Vivian wailing. She was not just crying, she was hyperventilating, likely surrounded by unpaid caterers demanding their final settlement. Her high-pitched sobs were punctuated by the sound of breaking glass. Someone had dropped a tray or thrown a champagne flute. I heard DeAndre shouting at someone over a different phone, barking empty threats at an automated banking hotline that would never answer him on a holiday. "Did you hear what I just said?" Terrence yelled, the phone rustling as he clearly paced back and forth. "Connor is having a complete meltdown. He just checked his merchant dashboard and the entire eco-friendly supply chain wire bounced. His operating accounts are reading zero. He is threatening to sue me, Maya. He is threatening to sue my logistics company for breach of contract. You have to fix the back end right now." He still did not understand. His towering arrogance was so thick, so deeply ingrained in his psyche, that his brain simply refused to process the reality of the situation. He genuinely believed this was a massive, unfortunate technological glitch. He thought the systems I built had failed, and he was commanding his glorified bank teller wife to reset the servers. He still thought he was the boss. "And my truck is gone." Terrence continued, his breathing growing even more erratic. "I walked outside to get a present for Zuri out of the trunk, and the driveway is empty." The security gate guard said a tactical tow truck bypassed the neighborhood entry and legally repossessed the vehicle. Legally repossessed Maya. "Did you forget to authorize the lease payment? You handle the administrative overhead. How could you let my primary vehicle go into default?" He was trying to blame me for his own failure to pay his bills. He was trying to cast me as the negligent assistant who forgot to file the paperwork, completely oblivious to the fact that I was the holding company who ordered the tow truck. I remained entirely silent. I placed the crystal glass down on my mahogany desk. I leaned back and crossed my legs, staring at the flashing red alerts on my fourth monitor. The system was logging every single declined transaction attempt in real time. He was swiping dead plastic, hoping for a miracle. "Say something!" Terrence screamed, finally losing the last shred of his composure. You are doing this on purpose, are you not? You are punishing me because I told you to stay home. You are throwing a temper tantrum because Chloe is here. You are trying to embarrass me in front of my family over petty jealousy. He was projecting. He was throwing every manipulative tactic he had ever used against me at the wall, hoping one would stick. He wanted me to argue. He wanted me to defend myself against the accusation of jealousy. If I argued, he would have a target. He would have an emotional, irrational wife to blame for the ruined evening. "Do you have any idea what you are doing to a child?" Terrence demanded, shifting his strategy to weaponize his daughter. Zuri is sitting in the living room watching her grandmother cry. She is watching her father get humiliated. "You are ruining Christmas for an innocent little girl just to get back at me. Turn the accounts back on right now, Maya. I am not asking you. I am telling you. Unlock the trust." The desperation in his voice was intoxicating. The man who had casually banished me from a holiday gathering, the man who had secretly funded his white brother-in-law with my capital, the man who had embezzled from our joint accounts to inflate the vanity business of the woman who replaced me, was now begging and threatening me in the same breath. I could hear Chloe in the background now. Her voice was sharp and frantic. She was demanding to know why her boutique payment gateway had just sent her a federal tax suspension alert. She was asking Terrence why her business checking was frozen. The entire house of cards had completely collapsed, burying all of them under the rubble. "Maya, please," Terrence said, his tone suddenly dropping from a scream to a pathetic shaking plea. The realization was finally creeping into his mind. The absolute silence on my end of the line was doing exactly what I intended. It was suffocating him. He was finally connecting the dots. The simultaneous failure of the family trust, the logistics company, the credit lines, the car lease, and Chloe's boutique could not be a glitch. It was a targeted, synchronized strike. He finally understood that the woman he left in the kitchen was not a casualty. She was the executioner. "Please," Terrence whispered into the phone, the sound of his pride shattering completely. "Tell me this is a mistake. Tell me you did not just wipe out everything." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cool leather of my desk pad. The time for silence was over. It was time to deliver the verbal kill shot. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell over the chaotic symphony of his collapsing world. I leaned closer to the microphone, drawing a slow, steady breath. The blue light from my 4 monitors illuminated my face, casting long, sharp shadows across the walls of my penthouse. When I finally spoke, I perfectly mirrored the exact casual tone he had used in our pristine kitchen 12 hours ago when he told me I was not welcome at his family table. "I am just making sure your ex-wife gets the complete experience, Terrence," I said smoothly. "A broke man with a failing business living in a foreclosed house. It is exactly what she signed up for when she decided to play house with my money." The dead silence on his end was absolute. For a fraction of a second, even the background noise of Vivian sobbing and Connor screaming seemed to evaporate. Terrence was processing the sheer magnitude of his miscalculation. He opened his mouth, emitting a ragged choking sound, but no actual words formed. The invincible executive had been reduced to a gasping amateur. "You wanted Zuri to have a complete holiday with her real family?" I continued, the ice in my voice crystallizing over the cellular connection. "I completely agree. I think it is beautiful. I think it is deeply important that she sees her father for who he truly is. Not a self-made logistics titan, not a generous benefactor who funds his white brother-in-law, and certainly not a man who buys luxury vehicles and diamond bracelets on his own merit. She is getting the authentic Terrence tonight. The man who has to steal from his wife's private equity holdings to buy respect." "Maya, please," he finally croaked out. The arrogant bass in his voice had shattered into a high, desperate whine. "You cannot do this." The Internal Revenue notification: "Chloe just got an email from her payment processor. You reported her boutique. She is going to jail for tax evasion. We share a daughter. You are destroying the mother of my child." "I did not evade federal taxes, Terrence. You and Chloe did. I simply provided the Internal Revenue Service with a highly detailed 120-page forensic accounting report to ensure her public claims of being a self-made entrepreneur matched her federal filings. I am a licensed financial fiduciary. I have a legal obligation to report corporate embezzlement when I find it in my own holding accounts. I took another deliberate sip of my bourbon, letting the warmth settle in my chest. The liquor tasted like absolute victory. And speaking of legal obligations, you might want to advise your parents to start packing. The anonymous proxy corporation that bailed them out of federal bankruptcy 3 years ago has officially accelerated their defaulted mortgage. They have 30 days to vacate my property, but knowing Vivian, she will probably want to start boxing up those grandmother's pearls tonight before the movers get there. Your property. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was hyperventilating now, taking short, sharp breaths. You own my parents' house. You own the estate. Maya, no. You are lying. You are bluffing. You do not have that kind of leverage. Check the deed on the public registry, I replied simply. It was transferred to my Delaware Limited Liability Company at 11:59 tonight, just like the repossession order for your Mercedes vehicle. Tell me, did the tow truck driver at least let you get Zura's presents out of the trunk before he dragged your ego down the street? He began to sob. Actual guttural sobs. The man who had dismissed me as a glorified bank teller was weeping into the receiver. The mighty patriarch was breaking down in real time. Maya, I am begging you. I will send Chloe away right now. I will kick Connor out. I will make my parents apologize to you. I will do whatever you want. Please just unlock the trust. Just give me a bridge loan. I am begging you on my hands and knees. It was pathetic. He was willing to discard the very people he had claimed were his true family the second the money dried up. He would throw his ex-wife to the wolves and banish his sister's husband if it meant saving his own skin. This was the loyalty of the Sterling family. It was entirely conditional, entirely transactional, and entirely worthless. You do not have any knees left to stand on, Terence, I said, feeling the absolute power radiating through my veins. The transition was complete. I was no longer the silent wife in the background. I was the architect of his demise. Enjoy your complete Christmas. I will see you at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. We have some paperwork to finalize. Wait, what paperwork? Maya, do not hang up. Maya, I need you. Merry Christmas, Terence. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I pressed the red button, cutting off his frantic, pleading screams mid-sentence. The sudden cutoff felt incredibly satisfying. I did not just end the call. I held down the power button on the side of the device and watched the screen go completely black. The digital connection was dead. I tossed the powered-down phone onto the far end of the mahogany desk. It would not ring again tonight. The silence returned to my penthouse, thick and luxurious. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the massive windows. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the city of Atlanta in a quiet, freezing embrace. The storm had arrived. I finished the last drop of my bourbon, my mind already shifting to the next phase of the operation. The financial execution was flawless. The digital warfare had achieved total victory. But the final, most satisfying act was still to come. I needed to look them in the eyes when they realized who held the deed to their lives. I closed my laptop, the blue light fading from the room, and prepared myself for the morning. The landlord was coming to collect. The black town car glided through the quiet streets of Buckhead. It was exactly 8 o'clock on Christmas morning. The overnight snowfall had left a crisp, blindingly bright layer of frost over the manicured lawns of Atlanta's most exclusive neighborhood. My driver navigated the winding roads with smooth precision, slowing down as we approached the massive wrought iron gates of the Sterling estate. I did not lean forward to speak to the security intercom. I did not request permission to enter the property. I simply lowered my tinted window, entered the master administrative override code into the digital keypad, and watched the heavy gates swing open to welcome the actual owner of the land. We pulled into the sweeping circular driveway. The space felt remarkably empty. The customized matte black luxury sport utility vehicle that had been the centerpiece of Terrence's arrogant social media broadcast was gone, successfully repossessed, and sitting in a bleak municipal impound lot downtown. The absence of that vehicle was a beautiful, glaring monument to the financial slaughter I had orchestrated overnight. I stepped out of the town car. The freezing winter air hit my face, but I felt nothing but a warm, radiating sense of absolute power. I was dressed in a tailored camel cashmere coat, pristine leather boots, and holding a structured designer bag that contained the legal documents to dismantle whatever remained of their dignity. I walked up the grand stone steps leading to the heavy double oak front doors. For years, I had stood on this very porch waiting for Vivian to open the door, waiting for her to offer a tight, condescending smile before criticizing my outfit or my career. I had always been treated as a guest who barely made the guest list. I did not ring the doorbell today. I did not knock. I reached into my bag and extracted a heavy brass key. I inserted the master key into the deadbolt. The lock turned with a loud, satisfying, heavy clink. I pushed the grand oak doors open and stepped into the sprawling marble foyer. The blast of cold air from the outside rushed into the overheated, suffocating atmosphere of the house. The scene unfolding in front of me was a masterpiece of absolute destruction. The perfect family Christmas that Terrence had so desperately wanted to orchestrate was a burning wreckage. The illusion of generational wealth had completely collapsed, leaving only desperate, terrified people in its wake. Nobody noticed my entrance at first because the screaming was deafening. Terrence was pacing a frantic trench into the imported Persian rug. He looked like a man who had been physically beaten. He was still wearing the same tailored velvet dinner jacket from his smug video the night before, but it was ruined. The jacket was wrinkled and unbuttoned, his expensive silk tie ripped off and discarded on the floor. His eyes were bloodshot and sunken with dark, heavy bags from a completely sleepless night. He was clutching his dead, useless cellular phone, muttering to himself as he paced back and forth entirely stripped of his corporate executive bravado. Across the foyer, Chloe was curled up on the custom white designer sofa. The glamorous society wife persona was completely gone. She was weeping hysterically, her makeup running down her face in dark streaks. She was clutching a tablet, staring at the bright red federal tax suspension notices blocking her boutique merchant accounts. She was loudly lamenting that her suppliers were sending default emails, and her landlord was threatening to lock the doors of her storefront. The reality that her entire identity as a self-made business owner was a federal crime scene had finally broken her. But the loudest noise in the room was coming from the archway leading to the formal dining room. Connor was engaged in a vicious screaming match with his wife, Jada. The white, progressive, eco-friendly ally had completely dropped his calm, enlightened facade. His face was flushed bright red with pure, unadulterated entitlement and rage. "You told me he had the capital," Connor screamed, waving his arms aggressively at Jada. "You told me your brother was good for the holiday bridge loan. My German vendors are locking me out. The Aspen Chalet host just canceled our reservation because the card declined. I am facing corporate default by Tuesday morning, and your brother is pacing around like a lunatic telling me his bank accounts are gone." Jada was shouting back, equally humiliated and terrified. "Do not yell at me in my parents' house, Connor. We are all dealing with a banking error. Terrence will fix it. You just need to calm down and wait for the banks to open. There is no banking error," Connor roared back, his voice cracking with panic. "A bank error does not repo a luxury vehicle from the driveway in the middle of the night. A bank error does not freeze a corporate supply chain. We are ruined, Jada. We are completely bankrupt." In the corner of the room, Vivian sat slumped in an ornate armchair. The matriarch of the Sterling family looked as though she had aged 10 years overnight. Her emerald silk dress was crumpled, her posture entirely defeated. DeAndre stood near the hallway pouring a glass of dark liquor at 8 o'clock in the morning, staring blankly at the wall, completely paralyzed by the realization that his hidden financial failures had finally caught up to him. I stood silently in the entryway, absorbing the magnificent chaos I had created. I let them scream. I let them panic. I let them mourn the death of their stolen money. Then I reached behind me and pushed the heavy oak door. It slammed shut with a thunderous, echoing crash that reverberated off the high ceilings of the grand foyer. The screaming stopped instantly. Connor froze mid-sentence. Chloe gasped and sat up from the sofa. Vivian flinched in her armchair. Every single head in the room snapped toward the entryway. I stood perfectly still on the imported marble floor. I met Terrence's bloodshot eyes. He stared at my calm demeanor, my immaculate outfit, and the absolute terrifying lack of sympathy on my face. The heavy silence stretched across the room as the reality of who truly held the power finally settled over the entire family. Vivian recovered first. Her survival instinct was rooted in decades of dominating country club luncheons and silencing dissent with a single withering glare. She straightened her spine, smoothing the front of her wrinkled emerald silk dress, and marched across the foyer toward me. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble, echoing the frantic beating of her own heart. She stopped exactly 3 feet away, lifting her chin to look down her nose at me despite my boots putting us at equal height. "How dare you walk into my home?" Vivian spat. Her voice was trembling with indignation, but she fought desperately to maintain her aristocratic facade. "After the stunt you pulled last night, locking our accounts with your little banking tricks, you have the absolute audacity to show your face here. Get out. We are dealing with a severe family crisis, and you are no longer part of this family. Terrence is handling the bank, and Chloe is here to support him. You are trespassing on private property." I did not blink. I did not shift my weight. I looked at the woman who had spent years treating me like an uninvited guest at a dinner party I had secretly catered. I looked past her to DeAndre, who was clutching his glass of dark liquor like a lifeline, and then to Terrence, who was suddenly looking very pale and very small. "Your home," I repeated, tasting the sheer, unadulterated delusion of those 2 words. "That is a fascinating concept, Vivian." She crossed her arms over her chest, her knuckles turning white. "Do not play semantics with me, Maya. I know you are angry because Terrence wanted his daughter to have a proper holiday with her real mother, but throwing a digital tantrum does not change the fact that this is the Sterling estate. We have lived here for 25 years. You are just a guest who overstayed her welcome. Now leave before I have Connor call the police." I unclasped the gold hardware of my structured designer bag. The smooth mechanical sound drew every single eye in the room. I reached inside and withdrew a thick, crisp manila folder. I held it in my right hand, feeling the satisfying weight of their entire generational legacy bound in legal parchment. I took 2 slow, deliberate steps forward, forcing Vivian to step back to maintain her personal space. I moved directly to her pristine marble entryway table, the one adorned with a massive, ridiculous arrangement of imported winter lilies. I dropped the folder onto the marble. The heavy smack of paper hitting stone made Chloe physically jump on the sofa across the room. "What is this?" Vivian demanded, looking at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. "That is reality," I said, my voice cutting through the frosty air of the foyer with surgical precision. "I suggest you open it." Vivian scoffed, lifting her chin higher, absolutely refusing to touch it. DeAndre, however, recognized the seal of a prominent Atlanta commercial real estate law firm stamped on the corner of the envelope. He set his crystal glass down on a side table and walked over his steps, hesitant and heavy. He picked up the folder, opened the flap, and pulled out the thick stack of documents. I watched his eyes scan the first page. It was the original promissory note from 3 years ago, the exact debt restructuring agreement he had signed to save himself from federal bankruptcy. His eyes darted to the second page, the assignment of the deed of trust. His breathing grew shallow, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He turned to the third page, the formal notice of default, and finally the 30-day notice to vacate. "DeAndre." "What is it?" Vivian snapped, losing her patience with his silence. "Tell her to leave so Terrence can fix the accounts. We have guests arriving for brunch in 3 hours. DeAndre did not look at his wife. He looked directly at me. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His hands began to shake violently, rattling the crisp legal pages. "The Proxy Corporation." DeAndre whispered, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of the revelation. "The private investment firm that bought our commercial debt." "It was you. It was always me," I replied smoothly, making sure my voice carried across the silent foyer so Terrence and Chloe could hear every single word. "You were drowning in bad commercial real estate bets, DeAndre. The federal creditors were days away from seizing everything you owned." Terrence came to me in the middle of the night, terrified that his precious family name would be dragged through the mud and his inheritance would be wiped out. "I used my private equity firm to purchase your defaulted debt. I paid off your aggressive creditors. I assumed the note. I became the bank." Vivian snatched the papers from her husband's shaking hands. Her eyes darted wildly across the legal jargon, desperately searching for a loophole, a mistake, a reason to call me a liar. She saw my legal name listed as the sole proprietor of the holding company holding the deed. She saw the bright red stamp indicating immediate foreclosure due to non-payment. "No!" Vivian gasped, the papers slipping from her fingers and scattering across the pristine marble floor. "No, this is impossible. This is our legacy. This house has been in the Sterling family for decades. You cannot just take it. You are a bank teller. You do not have this kind of capital." "I am not taking anything," I corrected her, maintaining my icy composure while her world burned to the ground. "I bought it. I own it. And for the last 3 years, I allowed you to live in it because I was under the impression I was part of the family you are so desperate to protect. But since you made it abundantly clear last night that I do not belong here, I decided it was time to legally clarify the property rights." Terrence finally moved. He took a step toward me, his face twisted in a mask of pure desperation. "Maya, you cannot do this to my parents. They are elderly. You cannot kick them out on the street on Christmas morning. I will get the money. I will pay the arrears. Just give me time to liquidate the logistics company assets. I will make you whole." I turned my gaze to Terrence, letting a sharp, humorless smile cross my face. "You cannot liquidate what you do not own, Terrence. Your logistics company has been operating on a massive deficit for 2 years. The only reason your doors stayed open was because I funneled anonymous capital into your operating accounts. Accounts I froze at midnight. You have absolutely nothing left to sell." Chloe let out a loud, theatrical sob from the sofa, finally realizing that the man she was clinging to for financial salvation was entirely bankrupt, and the grand estate she was hoping to secure for her daughter was officially seized. I looked back at Vivian. The haughty, untouchable matriarch was trembling, staring at the scattered eviction papers at her feet. The realization that she was completely dependent on the very woman she had relentlessly bullied had utterly destroyed her. She looked up at me, her mouth opening to speak, perhaps to beg, perhaps to hurl another insult to protect her shattered pride. But I did not give her the opportunity. "You have 30 days to vacate my property, Vivian. Make sure you do not scratch the floors on your way out." The heavy silence in the grand foyer was suddenly broken by the sound of someone clearing their throat. Connor stepped forward from the archway of the formal dining room. He carefully stepped around the eviction papers scattered across the marble floor, positioning himself directly between me and Vivian. He held his hands up in a placating gesture, palms facing outward, as if he were attempting to calm a wild animal. He smoothed the front of his sustainably sourced linen shirt, adjusted his posture, and slipped effortlessly into his favorite role. He was going to play the progressive, enlightened mediator. "Maya, let us all just take a deep breath here," Connor said. His voice was pitched low, dripping with that specific manufactured empathy he used to talk down to people. "I know you are hurting. I know Terrence made a massive mistake by not including you today. But you are escalating a personal grievance into a totally disproportionate response. You are being incredibly unreasonable right now." I did not blink. I simply watched him perform. "Look at the energy you are bringing into this house on a holiday," Connor continued, emboldened by my silence. "This hostility is toxic, Maya. You are acting aggressively. You are weaponizing your financial privilege to punish a family over a miscommunication. We are all dealing with the stress of these frozen accounts, and coming in here making threats about evictions is just vindictive. It is not healthy, and frankly, it is not who you are." He stood there, a white man whose entire lifestyle was subsidized by my labor tone, policing a black woman in the middle of a house she legally owned. He was lecturing me about privilege while wearing a designer watch paid for by my private equity yields. He thought his therapy speak and his calm demeanor would shame me into submission. He thought calling me hostile and aggressive would make me back down to prove him wrong. I did not argue with him. I did not defend my character. I reached back into my structured designer bag. "You are right about one thing, Connor," I said, my voice completely smooth and devoid of the anger he so desperately wanted to provoke. "Real wealth is a privilege, but it is not a charity." I pulled out a thick spiral-bound ledger secured in a navy blue presentation cover. I held it out to him. Connor frowned, his enlightened mediator facade faltering for a fraction of a second. He slowly reached out and took the heavy document from my hand. He flipped open the thick plastic cover. "What is this?" he asked, staring at the dense rows of financial data, routing numbers, and transaction timestamps. "That is an itemized record of your entire existence over the past 4 years," I replied, making sure my voice carried clearly across the silent foyer so Jada could hear every single word. "I have been auditing the logistics company accounts for months. You and Terrence thought you were incredibly clever, setting up recurring automated clearinghouse transfers disguised as supply chain consulting fees. You thought burying your personal expenses under the guise of an eco-friendly packaging startup would shield you from scrutiny." Connor went entirely still. His eyes darted rapidly across the first page of the ledger. The color began to drain from his face, starting at his neck and rushing upward until his skin was a sickly pale white. I narrated the contents of the ledger for the rest of the room. Page 4 details the $12,000 monthly wire transfer Terrence authorized to keep your failing business afloat. Page 9 shows the fraudulent invoice you submitted last week for a German manufacturing vendor. You coded it as a critical supply chain expense. The money actually paid for your luxury ski chalet in Aspen and cleared the outstanding balance on your platinum card. And my personal favorite is on page 12, the $8,000 charge at the jeweler in Buckhead for the diamond tennis bracelet you gave my sister-in-law. Jada let out a sharp, choked gasp from the background. She took a step toward her husband, staring at the side of his face in absolute horror. "Connor," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is she talking about? Tell me she is lying." Connor could not speak. He was physically incapable of forming a word. His hands were shaking so violently that the thick pages of the ledger audibly rattled in the quiet foyer. "He cannot tell you I am lying, Jada, because the bank statements are printed in full color right in front of him," I said calmly. I reached into my bag one final time. I withdrew a thin, crisp legal document folded precisely down the middle. I stepped closer to Connor. I did not hand this document to him. I held it up so he could read the bold, capitalized text across the top of the page. "Do you know what corporate embezzlement is, Connor?" I asked, dropping my voice to a sharp, clinical register. "When you siphon funds from a private business, it is a civil matter. But Terrence Logistics Company was originally capitalized by my private equity firm. That means you did not just steal from your brother-in-law. You defrauded a licensed federally regulated financial institution. You crossed state lines with wire transfers. That elevates your little holiday loan from a family dispute to federal wire fraud." Connor swallowed hard. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. The progressive, confident man who had just called me aggressive was entirely gone. He was looking at the draft of a civil lawsuit for corporate fraud, naming him as the primary defendant. "This draft complaint will be filed in federal court on Monday morning." I continued tapping the crisp paper with my manicured fingernail. "I am piercing your corporate veil. I am seizing the assets of your eco-friendly startup, though we both know those are worthless. More importantly, I am turning this entire ledger over to the federal authorities. You are not just facing bankruptcy, Connor. You are facing an indictment." "Please," Connor wheezed. The word barely escaped his throat. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, terrified, and completely stripped of his arrogant pride. "Maya, please. I did not know the money came from you. Terrence told me it was his profit. I just needed a bridge loan to keep my staff paid. I will pay it back. I will sign whatever you want. Please do not send this to the authorities. I will go to prison." I looked at him with absolute terrifying indifference. "You should have thought about your freedom before you decided to call my personal phone and order me to approve your stolen money," I said. "You wanted me to do my job, Connor. This is my job. I protect my capital." Jada let out a furious, gut-wrenching scream. She lunged forward, snatching the heavy ledger right out of Connor's trembling hands. She began flipping wildly through the pages, her eyes scanning the itemized proof of his financial parasitism. The fake business trips. The stolen money used to buy her affection. The absolute humiliation of realizing her entire marriage was subsidized by the very woman her family had just banished from their home. "You stole from her!" Jada shrieked, shoving Connor hard in the chest. "You stood in my mother's kitchen and mocked Maya for not being here today, and you are wearing a watch bought with her money. You are a fraud. You are a complete, pathetic fraud." Connor stumbled backward, throwing his hands up to defend himself against his wife's sudden assault. "Jada, wait, let me explain," he begged, entirely ignoring me now as he desperately tried to salvage his crumbling marriage. I took a step back smoothly, removing myself from their line of fire. I watched the perfect progressive ally completely disintegrate. His bravado had evaporated. His unearned wealth was gone. His freedom was hanging by a thread. I had completely shut him down without ever raising my voice. I turned my attention away from the arguing couple and shifted my gaze across the foyer. It was time to deal with the final parasite in the room. I shifted my gaze away from the spectacular implosion of Jada and Connor. The grand foyer of the estate was a battlefield of shattered egos and ruined legacies, but there was one remaining combatant who still believed she had a card to play. Chloe had stopped crying on the custom white sofa. She had watched me systematically dismantle the matriarch of this family and the progressive brother-in-law with cold, undeniable paperwork. Her survival instincts were kicking in. She stood up, smoothing the front of her expensive silk holiday loungewear, attempting to summon the haughty, privileged energy she had so proudly paraded on her social media broadcast just hours ago. She stepped directly in front of Terrence, physically placing herself between me and the man she believed was her ultimate protector. She lifted her chin, adopting the deeply manipulative tone of a fiercely protective mother. "You are a monster, Maya," Chloe said, her voice shaking but laced with venom. "You are standing here terrorizing a family on Christmas morning. You think you are so powerful because you have money, but you are just bitter." Terrence only moved those funds because he is a provider. He did it to ensure Zuri had a proper life. He invested in my boutique to build a legacy for his daughter, to make sure she was taken care of, because you are too obsessed with your spreadsheets and your private equity deals to understand what a real family actually needs. She thought she had found the perfect angle. She was weaponizing a child, attempting to cast me as the cold, barren career woman attacking a devoted father and a loving mother. She expected me to feel a pang of guilt. She wanted me to look at the collateral damage and retreat out of some misplaced sense of maternal solidarity. I looked her dead in the eye. I did not feel an ounce of guilt. I felt the absolute clarity of a woman who knew exactly how to balance a ledger. "You did not build a legacy for your daughter, Chloe?" I replied, my voice slicing through the heavy, tense air of the room. "You built a federal crime scene." I reached into my structured designer bag for the final time. I pulled out a thick, heavily bound document folder. It did not have the seal of a local real estate attorney or the letterhead of a civil litigator. It bore the stark, unmistakable formatting of a federal submission. I walked over to the glass coffee table sitting in front of the sofa and dropped the heavy file onto the surface. "I suggest you read the executive summary," I instructed, keeping my eyes locked on her suddenly pale face. "You love to call yourself a self-made entrepreneur to your thousands of followers online. You love to thank Terrence for being an amazing sponsor, but real sponsors use their own capital. Terrence used mine, and more importantly, you accepted those funds without declaring a single dime of it as commercial income." Chloe stared at the folder, her hands trembling at her sides. She refused to pick it up, as if touching the paper would make the nightmare real. Over the last 18 months, Terrence drafted fraudulent corporate invoices to siphon over $250,000 from my holding accounts directly into the operating checking account for your boutique, I explained, making sure every syllable landed with devastating precision. He categorized those wire transfers as supply chain consulting fees. You accepted those transfers and used them to pay your commercial rent fund, your lavish inventory launch parties, and maintain your ridiculous fake socialite lifestyle. You did not declare those transfers as taxable income. You did not pay gift taxes. You commingled stolen corporate funds with your personal vanity project. Chloe opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The aggressive, protective mother routine had completely evaporated, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated terror of a woman who suddenly realized she was entirely out of her depth. I spent the last 6 months compiling every single fraudulent invoice, every rooted wire transfer, and every false tax declaration into a 120-page forensic accounting report. I continued stepping closer to her so she could not look anywhere else but directly at me. I submitted that entire packet to the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division at midnight last night. I did not submit it anonymously. I submitted it under my full legal name and my federal fiduciary license numbers. Terrence let out a loud, strangled gasp from behind her. He stumbled backward, hitting the wall of the foyer, sliding down until he was sitting on the marble floor. He knew exactly what a federal submission meant. He knew the absolute finality of it. The automated fraud flags have already hit the banking networks, I said, delivering the fatal blow with perfect, chilling calm. That is why your merchant accounts are suspended. That is why your business checking is reading 0. By the time the federal offices open after the holiday weekend, your boutique will be officially locked down, pending a comprehensive federal audit. They will freeze your inventory. They will seize your business assets. And they will look very closely at the man who orchestrated the embezzlement. I paused, letting the absolute weight of her destruction settle over her shoulders. I offered her a sharp, humorless smile. You might want to find a very good tax attorney, Chloe. They are going to audit your boutique by New Year. Chloe collapsed onto the sofa. The immaculate, confident woman who had smirked at me from a high-resolution video was entirely gone. She began to sob uncontrollably, burying her face in her hands. Her carefully curated life, her prestigious retail location, and her entire public identity had just been incinerated. She spun around and looked at Terrence, her eyes wide with panic and sudden furious betrayal. "You told me it was clean money," Chloe screamed at him, her voice cracking hysterically. "You told me it was your profit. You dragged me into a federal tax fraud investigation. I am going to lose everything. I am going to go to federal prison and lose my daughter because you wanted to play big shot with your wife's bank accounts." Terrence did not answer her. He could not answer her. He sat on the cold marble floor of the grand foyer, his knees pulled up to his chest, looking completely and utterly destroyed. I took a step back, slowly surveying the battlefield I had just commanded. The scene was a masterpiece of total accountability. Vivian was still clutching the eviction notice, her dreams of generational wealth shattered. Connor was backed into a corner, hyperventilating as Jada screamed at him about the civil lawsuit and his impending corporate fraud indictment. Chloe was weeping on the sofa, facing the immediate, terrifying reality of a federal criminal tax audit. Terrence slowly lifted his head. He looked around the massive, echoing room. He looked at his mother, his brother-in-law, and his ex-wife. The people he had prioritized. The people he had stolen for. The people he had demanded I step aside for so he could enjoy a perfect, complete holiday. They were all crumbling to dust within the span of 10 minutes. He looked up at me, standing in the center of the foyer, unbothered, immaculate, and holding the absolute master key to his entire existence. The realization finally hit him with the force of a freight train. There was no one left to defend him. There was no one left to blame. He was entirely trapped in a burning house of his own making, and he had absolutely no allies left to save him. The heavy silence in the grand foyer was finally broken by the sound of a man completely unraveling. Terrence stared at the faces of the people he had stolen for, lied for, and ultimately destroyed his marriage for. Vivian was hyperventilating over a foreclosure notice. Connor was paralyzed by the reality of federal wire fraud. Chloe was weeping into her designer silk, calculating her impending prison sentence. There was no one left to shield him. The arrogant, untouchable logistics executive vanished, leaving behind nothing but a terrified coward. Terrence pushed himself off the wall and dropped heavily onto his knees. The sharp thud of his kneecaps hitting the imported marble floor echoed through the cavernous space. It was a sound I will never forget. This was the man who had stood in my custom kitchen just 24 hours earlier, adjusting his $40,000 watch, demanding I stay hidden in the shadows so his real family could enjoy their holiday. Now he was crawling toward my leather boots, his velvet dinner jacket dragging across the floor, his hands reaching out to grab the hem of my camel cashmere coat. Maya, I am so sorry. Terrence choked out the words, his chest heaving with desperate, jagged sobs. I made a mistake. It was all a massive, stupid mistake. I was just trying to keep the peace. My mother pressured me. Chloe was constantly demanding money for the business. I never wanted to hurt you. You know I love you. You are my wife. You are my partner. I looked down at him. I did not step back. I did not flinch. I felt an overwhelming wave of absolute terrifying apathy. I can fix this. Terrence begged, his voice cracking as he looked up at me with bloodshot, pleading eyes. I will send Chloe away right now. I will make her pack her bags and get out of this house. I will kick Connor out. I will ban him from the property. I will make my parents apologize to you on their hands and knees. Just please, Maya. Please undo the freezes. Give me a bridge loan to cover the boutique and the logistics accounts. I will pay you back every single cent. I will do whatever you want. I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you. Across the room, Chloe let out a sharp, hysterical shriek. You are going to send me away! She screamed, her voice breaking, as she stared at the man who was supposed to be her ultimate sponsor. You dragged me into federal tax fraud, you ruined my entire life, and now you are trying to throw me out into the snow to save yourself. You are a monster, Terrence. You are a pathetic, broke monster. Terrence did not even look at her. He kept his eyes locked on my face, completely abandoning the mother of his child without a second of hesitation. He was willing to sacrifice every single person in that room if it meant regaining access to my capital. He was offering me absolute obedience, promising to clear the house of my enemies if I just opened the vault one more time. I reached into my structured designer bag for the final time. I did not pull out a financial ledger or a foreclosure notice. I withdrew a thick, sealed manila envelope. I held it in my right hand, feeling the satisfying weight of my absolute liberation. I am not a bank, Terrence, I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, icy whisper that commanded the attention of the entire room. And I do not finance cowards. I broke the wax seal on the envelope and pulled out a crisp, meticulously drafted legal packet. The blue ink of my signature was already stark and dry on the final page. I held the documents out, letting them hover just inches from his tear-stained face. These are your divorce papers, I announced, ensuring my pronunciation was razor-sharp. They were drafted by my lead corporate attorney and signed by my legal team at 6 o'clock this morning. You will find that I have filed under the grounds of severe financial infidelity, gross asset dissipation, and corporate embezzlement. Terrence stared at the papers, his jaw trembling uncontrollably. Maya, no. Please do not do this. I included a comprehensive inventory of every single dollar you stole from our joint accounts to fund your ex-wife's failing boutique. I continued mercilessly detailing the architecture of his ruin. I included the forensic accounting of the wire transfers you authorized for your brother-in-law. Because you used marital assets to commit federal corporate fraud, my legal team has successfully secured an emergency injunction. You are stripped of any and all claims to my private equity firm, my holding companies, my real estate portfolio, and my personal capital. You are walking away from this marriage with exactly what you brought into it, absolutely nothing. I let the heavy stack of legal documents drop from my hand. They hit his chest and fluttered down onto the marble floor, scattering over his knees. He stared at the pages as if they were actively burning him. You wanted a complete Christmas with your real family? Terrence, I said, my voice echoing through the grand foyer with undeniable finality. I looked around the room, making eye contact with Vivian, who was clutching her eviction notice, with Connor, who was paralyzed by his impending indictment, and finally with Chloe, who was facing federal prison. I looked back down at the broken man kneeling at my feet. Now you have them, I told him, stepping back from his kneeling figure. And that is exactly all you have. I did not wait for his response. I did not stay to listen to the screaming, the crying, or the pathetic begging that immediately erupted behind me. I simply turned my back on the burning wreckage of the Sterling family. I walked toward the heavy double oak doors, my posture perfectly straight, my steps unhurried and measured. I reached out, turned the brass handle, and pushed the doors open. The crisp, freezing winter morning air rushed over me. It felt incredibly refreshing. It felt like breathing pure oxygen after spending years trapped in a suffocating toxic vault. I stepped out onto the grand stone porch, pulling my cashmere coat tighter around my shoulders. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me, instantly silencing the chaotic symphony of their destruction. The snow was falling gently, dusting the sprawling manicured lawns of the Buckhead estate. The world outside was bright, quiet, and completely untouched by the misery I had just left inside. I walked down the stone steps, my leather boots crunching satisfyingly against the fresh frost on the circular driveway. My driver was standing beside the black town car. He opened the rear door for me without saying a word, his expression perfectly professional. I slid into the warm, luxurious leather interior of the back seat. The door closed with a solid, isolating thud, shutting out the biting winter wind. I leaned back against the plush headrest and let out a long, slow exhale. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel a trace of sadness, regret, or mourning for the marriage I had just eradicated. I felt the profound, intoxicating rush of total victory. I had reclaimed my life, my capital, and my fundamental peace of mind. I reached into my bag and pulled out my encrypted tablet. The screen flared to life, illuminating the dim interior of the town car. I bypassed my personal communications entirely and opened my private equity dashboard. My lead acquisitions manager had uploaded a time-sensitive commercial portfolio overnight. It was a massive $150 million real estate acquisition targeting prime industrial zoning in the Pacific Northwest. It was a complex, highly lucrative deal that required a decisive, visionary leader to execute. I reviewed the final financial modeling. The projections were flawless. The return on investment was astronomical. I selected the digital signature tool and smoothly authorized the capital deployment. It took me exactly 3 seconds to execute a deal that would generate more wealth in a single quarter than the entire Sterling family had seen in 3 generations. I locked the tablet and placed it on the seat beside me. I reached forward and tapped my manicured fingernail against the glass partitions separating me from the driver. The glass glided down smoothly. "We are done here," I instructed, my voice calm and perfectly leveled. "Take me directly to the private airfield." "Understood, ma'am," the driver replied, shifting the vehicle into gear. The town car pulled smoothly out of the circular driveway. We passed through the massive wrought iron gates for the final time, leaving the foreclosed estate and the shattered remnants of Terrence's ego far behind. I watched the sprawling mansions of Buckhead blur past the tinted windows. My private jet was already fueled and waiting on the tarmac, prepped for a direct flight to the Caribbean. I was spending the rest of the holidays in my villa in St. Bart's, surrounded by turquoise water and absolute silence. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the chilled compartment in the console. I looked at my reflection in the dark tinted window of the town car. I was no longer a silent partner. I was no longer a compliant asset to be used and discarded by insecure people. I was exactly who I had built myself to be: unbothered, unmatched, and completely untouchable. The most profound lesson from this journey is that true security never comes from shrinking yourself to fit into spaces where you are not valued. For years, she quietly financed her husband and his family, hoping loyalty would eventually earn their respect. However, she realized that toxic people will gladly consume your resources while completely disregarding your humanity. The ultimate power lies in financial independence, impenetrable boundaries, and the courage to stop subsidizing your own disrespect. When you finally stop seeking validation from those committed to misunderstanding you, you reclaim the narrative, becoming unbothered, unmatched, and completely untouchable, moving forward. If you have ever had to set ruthless boundaries to protect your peace and reclaim your power, share your triumphant story in the comments below and subscribe for more empowering content.